Welcome, Antonia Darder.
By Paulo Freire. He wrote in Pedagogy of Freedom, "I am a teacher who favors the permanent struggle against every form of bigotry and against the economic domination of individuals and social classes. I am a teacher who rejects the present system of capitalism, responsible for their aberration of misery in the midst of plenty. I am a teacher full of the spirit of hope, in spite of all the signs to the contrary." I share Paulo's words with you here in that in many ways his work has been my anchor and my solace for the last 40 years of my life. I have been involved in the struggle for social justice in education since 1975. Throughout the work, I've participated actively in a variety of community, national, and international struggles to challenge the foul colonizing structures of racism and other forms of oppression, structures that have historically worked to sustain one of the most grossly unequal economies in the history of humankind. Capitalism is a phenomenon that egregiously impacts each and every one of us. It impacts in destructive ways the lives of the students that we love and that we work with and the communities in which we live. Yet issues of the economy or class struggle are so seldom a part of serious discussions within the field of multicultural education. In my early years as a multicultural educator and activist, we struggled to bring cultures and histories of economically disenfranchised and racialized students into the classroom. We wanted our children to understand themselves as subjects of history, a notion that persisted in Freire's work until his death. He believed that an important purpose of education was to create the context for student empowerment and community empowerment, which required that we become fully conscious of ourselves and that they become conscious of themselves as subjects of history, rather than marginalized objects of oppression. Hence, we worked within communities, with parents, with students, to push school districts to pass educational policy statements that would call for the integration of cultures, histories, and ancestral wisdom, which for so long had been silenced. It was about changing the very way we constructed knowledge and produced knowledge with our students. We fought because we believed then, and I continue to believe today, that public education is one of the few public spaces that remains in this society, which still has the potential to function in the interest of democratic life. And as such, it remains today an open terrain of struggle. For we are in the business of socializing our students to either acquiesce to the social conditions of inequality that exist in their lives, or we work to unveil and critique those conditions in ways that begin to cultivate dialogue, voice, participation, and solidarity among them, so that we can construct knowledge that is truly meaningful to their lives. Unfortunately, too often, the education that our children have received, and for the most part continue to receive, has been shaped by a recalcitrant ethos of assimilation and deficit, which often wittingly or unwittingly, albeit in more sophisticated ways today, it's the same old racializing classes, sexist, ableist, and homophobic values of the past. And we often live them out without even being conscious of how they come out. I heard an educator at a graduation talking about how wonderful it was that these children were graduating. That they wouldn't have to, they wouldn't have to live in poverty, and they wouldn't have to anymore do the, menial work. And what was so frustrating to me in that is that a lot of the parents that were sitting out in the audience of the children who were graduating first generation were in fact menial workers, so-called. So indirectly, it perpetuates a notion that some people are more valuable than other people. And I think that part of our struggle is how do we begin to change that in our discourse, in our language, and in the way we teach. There continues to exist this ethos of normalcy and of the good student. Educational priorities and approaches based on high-stakes testing, on fragmented and diluted curriculum, on ruthless competition, on incessant tracking of our children persists, despite the fact that there's pseudo-scientific methods that are used to say that that's okay to teach children that way, have been shown repeatedly over and over again in the last 4 decades to be not only ineffective, but disabling to the academic formation of our kids. And why do these policies persist? They persist because these conditions of schooling effectively do their job. They effectively work to perpetuate inequality, which then preserves an unjust distribution of wealth and power in the society. These are conditions that impede the academic formation of our children, who then are subject to an unfair system of meritocracy that then blames them for their failure. Instead, multiculturalism became instrumentalized as it became absorbed in the hegemonic culture of schooling. This was not the multicultural education for which we have fought so hard for. This was a multicultural education that we wanted. We wanted a form of education that could transform the academic development of our children. What we got has not done that. And the statistics on academic performance, on suspensions, on expulsions, on dropout rates, on teen unemployment, and youth incarceration speak for themselves. And science, technology, and mathematics, I'm sorry, are not the panacea that the advocates proclaim. They are not going to save our communities. For inherent in the STEM paradigm is a deeply materialistic, reductionist, and determinist culture that is wreaking havoc on the world. A culture where heart and spirit have been extracted despite radical forms of science that now are speaking about the fallacy of that very same paradigm. Literally, at the end of the day, most of the concepts based upon our cultural knowledge and indigenous ways of knowing, with ontological, epistemological, and cosmological challenges to Western philosophical assumptions, were conveniently watered down as dominant artifact representations of multiculturalism, or the thingification of multiculturalism, seizing on Antonia Darder's term, suddenly became the order of the day. Multicultural was a thing that you could sell. You could make it a product. Culture isn't a product that you can sell. Culture is a way of life, and it has to do with survival, and it's evolutionary, and it continues. Conquer and conquest has been justified and enacted in a million different ways with preconditioned suppositions that have functioned to keep us blind and unaware of the greed, selfishness that underlies the political economy that rules our lives. For this reason, Peter McLaren argues, regardless of the personal, epistemological, ontological, and moral paths that we choose to take as educators, at some point we have to come face to face with the naked reality of capitalist social relations. And if we are to engage a revolutionary educational praxis, we need to do more than rail against the suffering and tribulations of the oppressed, and instead seek ways of transforming them. There's always this attitude that the reason we don't get along is because we're culturally different. That I do not believe. I've traveled too much around the world. That is not what I believe. What in fact causes the problems are unfair and unjust conditions that are based on political and economic greed and the narcissism of the ruling class. I want to advocate for what I call a critical evolutionary multiculturalism, founded upon the belief that the evolution of consciousness is and always has been a significant dimension of our humanity and our revolutionary struggle. The way we think about the world has to do with how we act in the world. And so our minds, we needed, what did it mean to become, historical beings? It meant that we understood that we were part of a larger historical process, a larger evolutionary process. And as such, what we as multicultural educators need to do is create ways of education and organizations that build emancipatory conditions where all people, no matter their differences, can be united in the ecological understanding of ourselves as a species of this planet. And moreover, that our biodiversity, our cultural and linguistic differences are absolutely central to our human evolution, our survival, and our sustainability. We must acknowledge that the hyper-materialism, determinism, individualism, and competitiveness and greed of capitalism make the paradigm absolutely unsustainable for the future. Critical evolutionary multiculturalism offers us a liberation paradigm in which ecological questions and the well-being of all people within our communities and across our communities are placed at the very center of educational priorities and pedagogical practices in response to a society who does that as well. This emancipatory struggle must be understood as a collective dream of humanity, living itself out in different ways as we aspire to greater creativity, to greater sustainability through integral knowledge of our minds, of our hearts, of our bodies, and our spirits. We are a multicultural species. We need to labor together for the self-determination of our communities, our society, and our planet. So no longer then can we think it's enough to remain separated within our individual struggles of particular communities. I firmly believe that each of our cultural communities must be strong. There's no doubt in my mind that we need to develop and cultivate the strength and wisdom of our own cultural communities, and our ancestral knowledge must be part of our life. But if the planet is on fire, as it is today, it's going to require a critical evolutionary multicultural understanding of life and politics. If we're to establish the political and economic solidarity and love for one another, for which we can all evolve and continue learning and growing together. Our children and grandchildren need us to leave them a world in which they can live free. They deserve to find a planet that is restorative and humanizing at its core, where radical dignity, respect, and love is at the very heart of a revolutionary multicultural ethics of education, and where a radical faith and hope steers our compass in the making of that new world. Thank you.